So controversially, I think that this is the best Spider-Man suit that we've actually ever had in live action. But I don't actually think it's because it's more comic book accurate. And yet I know the colours are more traditional, the design is a lot simpler, and it does look much closer to what people actually envision a Spider-Man suit to actually look like. But the more that I've actually looked into it, especially after reading what the costume designer has said about making it, I think the reason it works is actually a lot more interesting and what I want to get into. Because this suit actually looks like it belongs to Peter Parker himself. And weirdly, I don't think the suits that have come before have actually seemed that way. So for Brand New Day, Peter is just completely on his own. The world doesn't remember him, he no longer has Stark Industries behind him and funding his suits, and the costume designer Makovic Hayes has said that the starting point for the new suit was basically asking, if Peter has none of that technology anymore, how does he actually make it himself? And director Destin Daniel Cretton wanted something simpler, more homemade and more approachable. They even made a conscious decision not to digitally smooth away the wrinkles afterwards because they wanted it to feel like a real costume Peter was actually physically wearing. And I think that decision tells you almost everything you need to know about the design and how it works. Because the easy argument here would be that Marvel finally realised that Stark suits were just a mistake. But I don't really fully agree with that. I actually think the Homecoming suit is a very clever design for that version of Peter. Tony Stark gives this teenager a suit loaded with technology, an onboard AI, different web modes, surveillance features, a drone-enhanced combat systems. At point, it feels closer to a stripped-down Iron Man suit than the Spider-Man suits were ever seen before. And visually, that makes sense for the story that they were actually telling. Peter is young, he desperately wants to prove himself. He's been handed something far more sophisticated than anything he could actually build himself. And a big part of Homecoming is him figuring out whether he can actually be Spider-Man without all that. So I don't think the technology was the mistake necessarily. The suit was telling us where Peter Parker was in his life. The problem would have been putting Peter Parker back into it now. Like, he's older, he's alone, nobody is coming to upgrade his web shooters for him. But suddenly, all those little imperfections, they kind of become useful. You can see the fabric moving over his body. There are wrinkles, it doesn't always sit perfectly. It feels much more like something being worn rather than something digitally sealed on top of him. And this is where I think the design gets a lot more interesting, because making something look simpler doesn't necessarily make the costume department's job simpler. Apparently, it actually did the opposite. Hayes said the previous suits had enough detail that certain things could effectively disappear inside the design. With this one, there was actually nowhere to hide. They tested more than 250 meters of fabric just trying to get the red and blue to behave correctly under different digital cameras and lighting conditions. The colours that looked right to the eye weren't necessarily reading correctly on camera. And at one point, a red fabric was appearing too pink, so they were adjusting the underlying colours specifically for how the camera would reproduce them. The fabric was then printed with a clear treatment to give it some of the sheen that they wanted without turning it into something overly technological. And I love that because visually, this suit just looks effortless. You look at it and think, it's Spider-Man, red, blue, and webs. Meanwhile, somebody has apparently gone through hundreds of meters of fabric trying to find the exact red that doesn't turn pink when Tom Holland walks underneath a different light. And that tells you something important about simple character design. And that is when less is happening, the things that remain have to be right. I mean, just look at how much of the new suit is just large, readable areas of color. There's less visual interruption across the whole body. You don't need loads of panel lines creating interest because Spider-Man already has such a strong silhouette. The masks, the eye shapes, the spider emblem, the web pattern going across the entire suit, red against the blue, those are doing most of the work. And because the costume itself has already become quieter, you notice the body inside of it more. And that feels particularly important for Spider-Man. He is such a physical character. Half of his personality comes from the way he crouches, twists, hangs, and moves through space, through New York. If you put too much design information onto the suit, some of that movement starts competing with the costume, and it's just a blur. Here the body gets to carry more of the image. And there's another detail from the costume interview that I think kind of supports this. Tom Holland apparently wore the physical suit for around 80% of the film, I believe. more than he had for previous Spider-Man films. Around 56 suits were made across Holland and the various stunt performers because the production was shooting in different places and costumes were getting damaged during stunt work, and even Hayes has said that there's no muscle suit underneath it. So what you're seeing is physically Tom Holland under the costume. That might sound like production trivia, but visually I think this matters immensely, because one thing this film does really well is make Spider-Man feel physically present in New York. You notice him interacting with actual surfaces, you notice the way the fabric reacts when he moves, you notice him getting dirty or damaged. The suit stops feeling like this pristine object that exists separately from the person, and it becomes something that Peter lives in. And that is a very different relationship. Now obviously No Way Home had already started moving Peter back towards his more classic visual identity at the end. So Brand New Day hasn't suddenly invented the idea of putting Spider-Man in just pure red and blue again. But I think there's an important difference between something looking classic and something feeling genuinely homemade. And this is where I push back slightly on the idea that the new costume succeeds mainly through nostalgia. And Tom Holland was involved early in the design conversations, and according to Hayes, he wanted to incorporate things he liked from Tobey and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man costumes. And you can absolutely see that the design belongs to that broader lineage of live-action Spider-Man costumes. But if they had simply copied the Raimi suit, I don't think it would have worked nearly as well. Same with Andrew Garfield's suit. Those costumes belong to different Peters, and this one needed to look like something that this Peter could plausibly arrive to after everything that he's lost. That's the part that I think matters narratively, because costume design isn't really separate from character development. Peter has gone from being this teenager who was literally given his superhero identity by one of the richest and most technological advanced people on Earth, to somebody making this thing himself in his apartment. That changes what perfection actually means, I think. Little wrinkles in the suit actually help. A seam being visible helps. And the fabric looking like fabric actually helps. And I don't mean that the costume actually looks bad or anything. It clearly isn't. The amount of work behind it just proves the opposite. It's more that the craftsmanship is being used to create believable imperfections. And that is actually surprisingly difficult. Anyone can make something messy, but making something look handmade while still having it hold close up in action scenes and massive cinema screens is a very different problem. And that's why I've kind of changed my mind slightly about how I compare these suits. I don't think this is old Spider-Man design equals bad and new Spider-Man design just equals good. The Stark suit made sense when Peter was trying to become part of Tony Stark's world. This suit makes sense because that world is just gone. So when people say Brand New Day finally made Spider-Man look like Spider-Man again, I can understand completely what they mean. But I think the stronger achievement is that they've made him look like Peter Parker again. The costume feels like the result of circumstances rather than just being an upgrade that's been delivered to him. And that's probably why the simpler comic book design suddenly feels much more emotionally appropriate now than it could have ever been a few films ago. And I feel like there's a useful design lesson to all this as well. When you're adapting a character, it's really tempting to ask, what is the most iconic version? Or what will fans recognise the most? Those are important, yeah, absolutely. But I think the better question is, what should this character look like at this point in their story and their lives? Because a costume can be beautifully designed and still be wrong for the person wearing it. The Homecoming suit tells me that Peter Parker has access to technology that he barely understands. This one tells me that he's had to figure things out by himself. And I get all of that before anyone explains how the suit was even made. That's good visual storytelling. So, is this Tom Holland's best Spider-Man suit? For me, it absolutely is. But not because Marvel finally remembered what comics look like, and not because technology is somehow bad in Spider-Man. It works because almost every design decision is pointing towards this same version of Peter Parker. He is more independent than what he's ever been. He's more isolated from everyone. He doesn't have the resources that he used to have. And the suit looks like something that has just come out of that life. And the funny thing is, they apparently had to work incredibly hard to make it look this uncomplicated. And I think that's why it just feels so right. And I'm interested to know where everyone lands on this, because I know Spider-Man suits have a different ranking for every person. Everyone has their own Spider-Man suit. So, is this Tom Holland's best suit, or do you still prefer one of the earlier MCU designs, or even Toby and Andrew's, or something completely different? Let me know down below. And if you like these kind of videos where I do break down character designs and where they work, rather than just ranking what looks cool, then please subscribe. That's something I'm gonna keep pushing further along this channel. And if you are an artist trying to build a professional career around your work, my book, The Profitable Artist, covers portfolios, positioning, pricing, and working with clients. And a link to that is in the description below. And as always, thank you for watching.